Greetings, class. In the HTML world, forms serve as the graphical user interface that allow you to enter data. You can't have data science, data integration, databases on the back end without an interface for the user to enter that data. To log on to Canvas, you had to provide a username and password. We call those items fields. Those fields enable you to type data that is processed by the website. And there's some backend HTML code that does so. There'll be some styling elements. We call those cascading style sheets, CSS, that allow the form to look a certain way to bring about consistency. There will be some scripting elements, such as JavaScript, to make sure that when we ask for certain data, that you enter that data in the proper way. I'm going to show you a comprehensive solution here with a whole bunch of elements that you'll need later, but bookmark this video, bookmark the code that I share with you here, because it's going to enable you to be successful on some future projects. With no further ado, let me share my screen. Let's talk forms. And I want to talk forms by really starting backwards. What is the interface that we are seeking to achieve? Here, we actually are dealing with a offline solution. I've added the menu, and this is going to be a link to chapter 7. I'm using an offline tool called Notepad++, which I love. This is what I use in real world development when I'm working with clients in that sense, real world business development. So I've saved it offline, and I'm going to refresh over here. This is my preview. I noticed that as I put that menu item in, I hadn't quite put the chapter 7 link in label properly. So I fixed that, refreshed over here on this end. All right, but what I have here is a comprehensive HTML5 solution. Let's start over here at this point, the interface itself. Our standard navigation menu, and we're going to use a get form here at the top. Remember, forms are the graphical user interface that allows users to interact with the website. And so this is a field called first name, a field called last name, and this is proper because first name and last name are actually two separate pieces of information. You don't want to merge those together. This is a field called notes. We call that a text area, and a field, input field, called zip code, in which we're asking you to type in a 5-digit zip code. Now, a get form is distinct from a post form, which we'll talk about in a little bit. When you submit your data, that information is shown in the browser. It's a much less safe method for processing data when we talk about the get form. Both of them are used in web all the time. The post form is just a little bit more secure because of the way that it processes data on the back end. So let's go look at some mechanics of the get form behind the scenes, and then we'll talk a little bit more about the post form. Let's clear up a few of our markings, okay? As we go out to our code, let's take a look here. Our standard menu, this becomes this, okay? We're here at the H1, Dr. T on this HTML5 forms. Okay, that becomes this. Here, form method equals get, return validate get form, that calls the JavaScript, which we'll talk about here in a few moments. JavaScript validates to make sure that the field data is proper, okay? And now let's go look and see how the fields, the input type text fields, translate to what we see here. So my method is get, action pound says I'm going to go to myself. I'm not going to be sending the data anywhere. And in the standard HTML class, that's what we do because we're not teaching you scripting like Python and PHP to process the form data. That's a different programming language that you need to process the data. Right now, we're just seeking to give the interface for entering of the data. So we just do action equal pound, and on submit, validate it. Use the method get, which will show my data in the browser address bar. So when we say label for, this becomes this little item there. When we say input type equals text, ID needs to have a unique ID and a unique name. Notice those are the same. This is a required field. When we say HTML required, I can't just go and say, boom, aha, please fill out this field. Required is making sure you are validating and you must provide that data. The minimum length must be 2. So if I come in here and I put 1 character, oh no, please use at least 2 characters. You're currently using only 1. Placeholder is that text that you saw there. Enter first name, some nice instructions to the user. So this one chunk here made this field, this input field that you see here. It takes all this to make that. Okay? Keep that in mind as we move forward. That's the power of HTML. What the user sees on the front end is not always how this is going to translate on the back end. Very, very important to remember that. Okay, so I have also a last name field, which is represented here with a placeholder for last name. I also have notes, okay, which are translated here. Notice that this is a text area in terms of notes rather than an input type equals text. Text areas are larger. They give us a little bit more space to enter more data. Zip code is also a text field, but we are following a pattern that it should match. It should be 5 digits, and that placeholder helps us really talk about it. Now, back in the old days, I would use JavaScript to validate this. The beautiful thing about web today, HTML5, is you can do a lot of validation that took a lot of extra code for me to do right here in the midst of your code. For safety, it's best to also use JavaScript, although not mandatory for this particular assignment. I've given you an example of how we used to old school validate with JavaScript. Let's take a scroll up in the code to give you a view of that. Okay, I'm going to scroll up a tad over here on this side. So right here, when I say on submit, return validate get form, it goes to where I have this script reference and I have this function validate get form. It's going to check on the first name field, the zip code field, and this is also a way of reinforcing minimum length of 2, making sure that the pattern of zip code is 5 digits, making sure that the zip code is indeed exactly 5 digits, doesn't exceed, although zip codes can have dashes and be more, we know. And it will alert the user if they submitted it successfully, if they did it successfully, because all this code did not execute until we got there. This was the longer, old school, tougher method that I used to use, but that's not mandatory for you today. By simply typing these required min links placeholders just like that, doing these one-liners, and we put it on multiple lines just for readability. 4 lines, you don't have to do all that code that I had there at the top. This is doing exactly the same thing, but just in a few lines of code, really 3, as opposed to how many lines of code do we have there on that get form? 43 down to 61, almost 19 lines of code, 18 lines of code there to help achieve what we can now do in 3. Two different ways of doing the same thing, but using HTML5's power versus JavaScript. But they're working together. Make no mistake, they're working together to make this happen. Let me go ahead and say, okay, Tyson, all right, what happens next? Dr. T is cool. I know I am. I know you know I am. Let me just try to put okay. I put a 3-digit zip code and said, no, that's not going to work, Dr. T. Submit. Aha. Get form submitted successfully. So that's the JavaScript working for us right there, folks. Get form submitted successfully. That is a message from JavaScript. Right up here. Get form submitted successfully. Why? Because it doubly reinforced that all our fields met the validation criteria. And if it did, that message shows up on screen. Programming is patterns, patterns is programming. This first name is consistent with how we spelled first name here. You see that? This last name, actually, we didn't even validate last name, but this zip code is consistent with how I spelled zip code here. Very, very case sensitive. But that's the get form. Now, okay, look at the power and magic of this. I told y'all that the get form, it tells on us a bit more. Look right up here. Do you see how first name equal Tyson? Whew. If someone is looking over your shoulder, mind equal blown, I could go steal your username and password. That'd be so wonderful. So wonderful for a cyber malicious person on the dark side of the force. But I'm on the light side of the force, and I teach you how to be on the light side of the force. Look at what's happening there. Very transparently showing you all the data that was submitted on that form. That's the get form versus the post form. Okay. Speaking of that post form, let's go here. I have a post form that's going to capture an input field called username, an input field called password, and this access level is a drop-down menu. Okay. How do those translate? Let's go look at drop-down menus in terms of code. Scroll down a tad. The drop-down menu right here is called a select in the HTML world. We called it ID access, ID name. We made it a required field. You have 3 different levels of access, and they are admin, regular, and guest, which I can choose. Okay, and there they are. Option value equals admin, option value equals regular, option value equals guest. I'm able to type this HTML code translated as a drop down for the purposes of the work that we're doing over here. And so I am to enter a username that has a minimum length of 4. A password field is actually a password field rather than text. Why is that? Because it puts this nice star, star, star in rather than just clear text showing your password on screen. Look here. Okay, I'm going to say test Dr. user. And then, okay, my password is in and I'm an admin. Look what happens when you submit the post form versus what we did with the get form. Submit. Okay, the post form submitted successfully, but it's not telling us extra information. Okay, it's not telling us extra information up here. It's not telling on me. You don't see any reference to the username and password. It's just a previous reference to our get form. I'm going to delete some of this data out. Okay, looking at it nice and clean. Post form, my username, password, whatever I want it to be. Access level guess, submit. All right, the post form submits successfully but does not share my data. You see that? All you get is that pound reference to the page that it was going to go to from an action standpoint. So what we have here, folks, in terms of this code is a basic comparison of the get form versus the post form. In this class, you're going to have two assignments where you're going to do individually a get form and individually a post form, and you're looking at a comparative analysis in this lecture on the difference between the two. But you see the power of HTML working there for us as we work with these particular forms. Now, note how these forms also have some consistency in terms of field length, in terms of visibility, in terms of this field set around forms, which I love, in terms of these little borders around to help position the forms on screen. I've loved those. Oftentimes you can place also for extra reinforcement, you can do something called the field set, which I'm typing in here. Field set, open, close, put that around the form data itself, open field set, close field set. And let's go refresh over here. See how that put a nice other kind of border around, okay, to help frame it a little bit better. And so I'll often ask you to do that in assignments as well. But there's something controlling the size of the fields here. Let's talk about that. We have what we call an embedded inline cascading style sheet. This style in the header says the body should be of a certain font, Arial, sans serif, margin 20 pixels. In forms, put a 1 pixel solid border around. That's what this little guy represents. It's gray. Let the margin be 30. Let the border radius be 8. Let H2s be a certain color, heading 2s. Let labels be block and margins in line. It can take these different tags and apply some styling. Let the input that is text area and select, all three of those be with 100%. Uh-oh, what if I want to be 80%? Because you know how my field set didn't quite fit in well here. I can modify this, say 80, save, refresh. Aha, now I got something that fits a little bit better. Okay. And then, okay, what if I go down to 90? Maybe that fits even better and brings that submit form back to where I want it. Okay. Submit form goes down here. All the fields are fitting inside. Then so cascading style sheets enable us to do some wonderful work in terms of design, changing design and look that the user sees on screen. These styling elements are playing a role in making this form look good, which is what I'm going to be requiring you to do throughout this class as well. There's a lot going on here, lots of good stuff. I'm going to provide this code for you to work with, so you have it as an example. But the cool thing about this is, as you learn to apply these things, style to make sure your forms look good, JavaScript to do some extra validation. Amazon, one of my favorite places, will not allow me to put in a 12-digit credit card number. You better put in 16 digits and they better have money on it, or they will not be bringing another package to your door until you pay for it properly. They validate. And the programmer is the person behind the scenes making sure that these companies have the right work in terms of validation of the content before people enter the data. You're seeing how the sausage is made in that regard. And here we are. We're validating with JavaScript here, validating the post form with JavaScript, validate post here. And our basic navigation menu is being shown within the body of our page. We are working real cleanly to put a get form here that is used by the user. Okay. Get form has a first name, a last name, and a notes and a zip code field, a submit button. That's what this guy translates as. And I put a field set around it because I love the framing of those on screen. The action is going to itself via the method get, which shows information in the browser. Return, validate get form. Upon submit, it will call that validate get form JavaScript, working together. Cascading style sheet is bringing about a consistency in the way that all these forms look on screen. I can use various HTML5 elements to make it feel required, put a minimum length on it, to put placeholder text there, to put a pattern to establish a regular expression, as we used to say, a regular expression, a pattern that this should be a zip code. It should use only digits 0 to 9. It should be only 5 numbers max, and the zip code must be 5 digits. Okay. And then the post form action to the pound, going to the page itself, going to our chapter 7 page itself, says when I return, I'm going to validate the post form. I'm going to have a username that must be a minimum of 4 characters. We're going to enter that username. Password must be a password field, so we're not showing everything in clear text. Minimum length of 6 digits on passwords. Placeholder, enter that password for us. We're going to have an access label drop down that allows me to choose an admin, regular, or guest for my data. Upon submission, the post form will validate itself and make sure that we have not put any blank fields in, okay? But also, it is important to note that the post form is going to give us a great access to some many items in terms of how we bring about the access level, the data on the back end. The post form is not going to tell on us in terms of the data that we entered into the form itself. It's not going to tell on us in the address bar. That's the main difference. So you have a wonderful solution here that we're working with for the purposes of this project. Now, remember I told y'all that I'm working offline here, but I have my Replit solution. And what I'd like to do, I'd like to bring that to this world. I'm going to see if it'll let me drag and drop. I think it will. So I've done all this chapter 7 HTML work offline, and I want that file to be a part of this canon here, a part of this process here. And let me see if that worked for me. Maybe it did, maybe it didn't. Let's see if chapter 7 became, here we go. So chapter 7 is now in my menu, all the code that I've typed here offline. And watch this through the miracle of computing. Through the miracle of computing, I can, okay, navigate, for instance, to the preview, okay? And on index, I need to make a reference to that particular item. Remember, above all, make sure on index that you have referenced every page in our system. And go back to our preview. Chapter 7 now is alive on the live web server in terms of the work that we did here offline as well. It's become part of the canon, okay? I can go between the home and chapter 7 as we build and work through this particular work. So students, this was a longer video, but so important to capture the essence of forms, how they work. Study this. Be prepared to work on this in your assignment number 2 and your assignment 3 and throughout this course. But above all, learn the power of HTML. You'll never look at web pages the same when you're entering data. A web programmer had to do work that we taught you today to make it happen. Programs don't just happen, they become, and that's the beauty of what we're teaching you how to do in this class. So students, until next time, I thank you for your kind time and attention, and we shall talk soon. Dr. T, signing out.